Debating on the motion, this House would require politicians to only use public services. May we call on Prime Minister?
As a politician, one of your responsibility is to engage with the people, to be able to understand their problems in the very beginning, right? One of the ways to understand, we think that one of the ways to understand is if you are able to experience the daily experiences of these people in relation to the public services that is to the public services that you offer from the government, for example, right? Like the only way that you will be able to understand that there is a need to innovate MIT, for example, is if you are able to experience being stuck in MRT, for example, and being late for your work, for example, and feel the inconvenience because of the malfunctions of MRT, right? We see that it is the only way that these politicians will be able to realize the urgency of taking actions, for example, on those particular problems in the very beginning. We think that what we require is the way of our requiring this politician is that we impose like minor offenses, for example, if they do not use these public services to begin with, right? So what's the problem here? We think is that you won't be able to understand their problems if you are not able to experience their daily experiences at hand, right? What we want is that for the politician to use it to ensure quality of services and become more engaging as a politician to begin with. But before I proceed, yes.
These individuals still have the right to choose the services they want to consume. Secondly, at the end of the day, they will go home to their middle class or 1% homes and not really feel the people of how they feel every day. How does this solve the problem?
I tell you that as a politician, you will be more effective in solving the problems that is existing in status quo if you are able to experience these things out, right? Even if we understand, right, that they can also use their private car, for example, to go to a public to their offices, for example. But I'm going to tell you in my arguments why would it become more efficient if they use these public services to begin with. That it is not going to be good for these politicians only, but also to the people on the ground, right? We think that this is I'm going to talk about two things in this debate. One, where will these politicians provide quality services to the people in the first place? But secondly, where the politicians become more engaging with the people, right? We think that on the first argument, and provide quality services to the people, it is only if they're going to use these public services that they're going to be able to provide quality services. Because one, they're going to ensure that the services is good because they have to use these public services. Like for example, they have to make their public healthcare services to be good because they know that if they experience diseases, for example, they'll be using these kinds of facilities that public facilities, for example, that they have and they offer to other people as well. This means that instead of the government giving a standard or the minimum, for example, the minimum kind of services to the people, they make it more. They give them more effective medicines, for example, or a better services to begin with. Because the analysis is the things that they want. The politicians, the things that they want for themselves will be the things that they will apply to the people as a whole. So, if they want a good services in public healthcare services, then the tendency is they make it good for them to experience a good services, and this is going to be good to the people at the ground too, right? But secondly, I'm going to talk about where the politicians become more engaging with the people. We think that if you will be able to use these public services, the more that you will become as a politician exposed to the people on the ground, right? Which means that you'll be able to communicate with the people daily, for example, because you have to use these public services on your daily basis, right? Which means that you'll be able to observe all the things that's happening or all the phenomena, for example, before it becomes even it becomes a larger problems, for example, or what have you. And we think that this is only where you can hear more. hear more from the people, because what's happening in the status quo is that these politicians are for example, are very like living their lives so private. For example, that these individuals who have problems, or their constituents who have problems, for example, will not be able to like go reach them, for example, because they don't know where to find this. They don't know where to find these politicians if they are not in their offices, for example. Which means that if you're going to take the public transportation, for example, this is where these individuals will be like have easier ways to like approach you, because they can just like ride with you, for example, in MRT, for example, or what have you. And we think that this is where you become more sustainable, because you're able to like see the problems, and you'll be able to like answer it concurrently, right? Because we think that on the opposition, the problem will be that even if the opposition will tell you that engaging with the people is still present at their side, we think that engaging, even when not used, we think that they're going to tell you that engaging will still be possible even when not using public services. But we tell you that only using public services that you'll be able to see the individual's behavior at the moment, because we think that it's different when you know that a person suffers to when you know that when you see how the people suffers, because we think that there is a better observation, for example, when you particularly see it rather than based on the numerical data that your workers present to you as a politicians, right? We think that at least on our side of the house, you will be able to respond immediately, compared to not using it, that you will only be able to know the problems when a particular group lobbies you, for example, right? And we think that this is the only way that we can avoid the corruptions, for example, corruptions existing in the status quo, right? Because we think that if these individuals, for example, or the government employees, for example, who provide these healthcare units, for example, if they know that a particular politicians, for example, might at any time go to their go to their offices and acquire their services as well, the more that they will fund, for example, if they got the funds from the government, the more that they will give all these funds, for example, to making a quality of services, because they know that these politicians, for example, if they are in the higher level of hierarchy, will have to evaluate the services that they have from the experiences that they experience at hand, right? Which means that they'll be able to make it more good, because they know that politicians might make it an evaluation, for example, every time that they try to visit these facilities to experience the kind of services they have in the very beginning. As a government and as a politician, we have to know the people's suffering. You have to know the people's sufferings and provide solutions. And it's the best solution that you can offer when the solutions you give matches to the problem, because we experience these problems in the very beginning, right? And very from the government, opening government, we're very proud to post.
The Leader of Opposition.
Mr. Chair, we cannot deny the fact that society builds levels of what kind of people belong in this place, what kind of people belong in this higher place or in this lower place, Mr. Chair. Now, before I start my case, I will first provide a set of rebuttals for the opening government. First, he said that politicians are out of touch with the people, and that having them to use public services will allow them to hear more stories, will allow them to hear what the people need. But we do not think that would happen, Mr. Chair, because politicians will, at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, politicians will never feel the same as what other people will feel. Why is that? Because society will always feel that certain thinking of how this person has premium and this person does not have that premium, Mr. Chair. This is why, Mr. Chair, that argument will less likely to happen in their side. As I said again, politicians can't really feel what other people feel. So another thing that opening government said is that corruptions are more likely to happen if we don't allow them to use public services, Mr. Chair. But we do not think that we consider the fact, Mr. Chair, that it will happen. It will always happen. But if we are to make politicians use public services, Mr. Chair, corruption would still happen. Why is that? Because politicians will always use their power to change what would they be having right now. Why is it, Mr. Chair? Because they have the power and because they are in the system, Mr. Chair. We always say that it's true that the politicians' jobs is to serve the people, the government is for the people, right? But we cannot deny the fact that there are people who will always have power, Mr. Chair, and that there are people who have the money to make them comfortable for what they have, right? At the end of the day, is that they have means to escape them, Mr. Chair, because at the back of their mind, Mr. Chair, they will always have that advantage over people who don't have what they have, Mr. Chair. So basically, saying that politicians, making politicians use public services, Mr. Chair, will not solve any problem. It will be more likely to be not beneficial on their side. Firstly, because of the fact that corruption will always still exist and will be more inherent, and that there will always be ways that politicians can escape because they are in that system, Mr. Chair. Now, let me proceed to my first argument. Now, it is a fact, Mr. Chair, that every single individual in this country will have their rights, and that is the right to choose. It is the right to choose to have this and that. Then politicians will always have a higher burden on rather than ordinary people, right? They have accountability, which is what politicians have, Mr. Chair. Right? So what we want, instead of making them use public services just so they could hear the stories of the people, just so they could revamp the services of other people, it was more likely it is more beneficial if we are to change the system that they are in. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Chair, there is a certain difference between politicians and the people, right? There is a certain difference about how they live, what power they have, and the money that they have, Mr. Chair. We could change the system like having politicians have the things that other individual would have, like their days in absent. They are more accountable to that kind of. They have more burden to answer to that because they work always for the people. We hold a higher accountability, and we don't just make these politicians use public services. And what we do is just revamp the system in ways that we can, both the people, the system, the government, and these politicians could be better off. Now, this also creates how people are likely to give up some of their rights because of the fact that politicians work for them, right? It's like the thought of the social contract theory, where people are to give up some of their rights so that because the government works for them. Now, what have I told you in my speech today? That the OG's arguments will not fly because corruption will more likely to happen on their side, and that how people with premium and how people are just normal individuals with with the difference between how they live and where do they live in, that will not work out because of the fact that they will always have the advantage over the people, and that how it is their right also to choose because they have that, because they have this and that, and how it is a connection to the social contract theory where the people give up some of their rights just because the government has higher accountability to their jobs. And with that, with this, I am proud to close.
Speaker spoke for 6 minutes and 50 seconds. May we call on Deputy Prime Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, Louis came to this debate with two arguments, right? First, she talked about how these politicians have the right to choice and that they have the right to choose what services that they want to avail. We think that this debate isn't about rights, right? Because we have to look at how rights are actually formed. We think that the reason why rights exist is because we think that these rights are what gives society the best. These rights give society the best consequences, right? And we think that in our side is able to give better consequences and is able to benefit society even more, right? And she also told us that politicians have premiums, so that means that these politicians at the end of the day couldn't relate what these people feel, right? That's exactly why we want them to use these public services, right? And even if they say that these people still can't be affected because these people go to their luxury homes and they still stay, but we think that doesn't happen because people don't stay in their houses 24/7, right? We think that these politicians, they have to work outside, and that means that they have to still take these public transportations, and we take away the luxury of them going to work in a Tesla. We take the luxury away from them of going to a good hospital, right? Like let's say Chongwa in Cebu. We think that when we take away these premiums, we are able to create better policies for the people, and we are able to represent the people more, which is what my partner was talking about, right? So two arguments for you today. First, on how our side builds the people's trust and why that's important. And second, how our side makes public services more secure and more protected at the end of the day. So my first argument on how our side builds the people's trust. We think that in our side, we are able to represent the people more, right? We think that this happens in two ways, which is one, we think that politicians experience the hardships that these people go through, right? That even if they go to their luxury houses at the end of the day and they get to sleep in let's say $100,000 pesos bed, right? We think that when you take away their premium of private services, we think that these politicians can feel what it feels like to be a normal person and what it feels like to be poor or to be middle class in the society that they are handling, right? We think that in our side we are able to have make better policies, as what my partner has told you, is because these politicians know what it feels to take an MRT, they know what it feels to be late, and they know what it feels, right, to have to cramp inside a train because they can't afford to be late to go to their job, right? And we also think that the representation happens in another way, which is we think that these people can approach these politicians easier in our side, right? We think that when these people are when these politicians, right, they don't have their barriers anymore and they don't have their securities and the private rooms and the private cars to protect them, we think that the people can approach them better, and we think that people can discuss certain problems with these politicians, and we think that these people get get to go close to the politician, right? So that means that these people get to be more represented in society. So why is representation important? We think, sit down. We think that in a democratic society, right, we believe that we want the people to be satisfied because one, we think that the government has in this debate, the government has probably failed its people multiple times, right? And we think that by allowing these politicians to use these public services, this means that the people think that the politicians know what it feels like to be a normal citizen and these people know what it get the feeling, right, that they are represented and that their voices are being heard, right? So what does this mean? Yes.
If you learned anything from Salvador Panelo taking public transportation, is that these people still receive preferential treatment on the road. How can you assure us that they experience these hassles to the fullest extent?
We think that these hassles are going to be experienced at the end of the day because one, what happens is that it isn't going to be what happens is that these politicians are not going to go to these public services like just for one day, right? We think that what happens is that they go there every day and that it isn't just going to be one politician, it's going to be every politician, right? So what happens is that the politicians using these public services are going to be normalized, right? And what happens is that these people aren't going to get special treatment, right? Because the people know that this thing is normal and that these politicians taking these public services is normal, right? So second argument on how our side makes public services more secure. Our side believes that the primary reason why politicians use private services is we think that this is because they want to feel secure and they want to feel protected, right? But we think that in our side, right, in this debate, politicians are, when we force politicians to use public services, politicians are scared, and we think that the only way, and in our side, politicians are scared to get harassed, right, and to get attacked in these public services. We think that in our side, we incentivize these people to make these public services more secure, right? This means that public services are going to have more security, right? So instead of roads, right? We think that, like for example, hospitals will have more police, right? Or they would have more security. We think that this is good because in our side, the only way that these politicians can feel secure is if they make everyone else in society feel secure as well. So what did I tell you in this debate? I told you that our side represents the people more and our side allows these public services to become more secure. And for that, I am proud to propose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes. May we call on the leader of opposition?
It's insulting for you to think that a bus ride or an MRT ride to your house after your work as a politician could actively solve the cycle of oppression that people face every single day under an oppressive government, ladies and gentlemen. If your issue is about corruption and the politicians being out of touch, we think that these individuals have had a silver spoon in their mouths for their entire lives. So in this essence, making them use public systems, public transportations, or public services in general isn't going to solve the long-standing problem of how us as a society fail to hold them more accountable, ladies and gentlemen. Because we agree, right? We have become a society with a weak democracy, ladies and gentlemen, that treats politicians as though they're a higher strata, which isn't supposed to be the case, right? Politicians are supposed to work for us. But in this instance, we think that there's a problem-solution mismatch coming from the side of opening government. We think that the best solution here is for sustainable change of the system in itself. The system in itself makes it easier for accountability for these politicians. Like how in some countries where democracy is highly practiced, it's easy for you to call out and impeach certain politicians, ladies and gentlemen. How in some instances, you have societies at the end of the day making it easier for you to prosecute them and call them out when they have faults against the government, right? So we think that sustainable changes when it comes to the system changing, ladies and gentlemen, is a more probable cause as to having these politicians making a joke out of themselves and making the struggles and hardships of individuals trivial, ladies and gentlemen. Because you have to understand, right? At the end of the day, in the back of their minds, they have a fallback, ladies and gentlemen. They will always be comfortable. They will always live comfortable, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, let's go on to my first argument, right? How you gentrify these services even more. Society right now, ladies and gentlemen, there has already been a preference in inner, red tape and bureaucracy with politicians abusing the public services of the government, preferences of their sons and daughters getting into good universities instead of going to the people, ladies and gentlemen. Being first, ladies and gentlemen, have free medicine at the end of the day, even if you can't afford it, but you just want it to be cheap, right? That already exists in status quo. How much more under when you force politicians to use public services? There's already a culture, ladies and gentlemen, of preferential of these politicians at the end of the day. What you need to change in status quo is how people see these politicians. You don't see them, ladies and gentlemen, as your messiah or as your boss. You see them, ladies and gentlemen, as somebody, as equals, right? And you only see them as equals when people think that they have the power to oust them out of power, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that the most preferable and systematic change is to have rules and regulations and accountability to be higher, i.e. pass regulations, for example, for politicians to be impeached easier, ladies and gentlemen. I.e., for example, ladies and gentlemen, we have court hearings, easier for people to hold access to their local barangay officers or to their local mayors, etc. But secondly, right, the gentrification of public services is even more harmful under your paradigm, right? Because what happens then? You have more preference. You already have a society that, as coming from OG, you already have a society where politicians already feel out of touch. They'll even feel more out of touch, ladies and gentlemen, when society literally makes you say, oh, okay, we'll pass this rule to make you feel like, you're part of this. But we already are a society that kind of thinks that you're hot shit and stuff like that. So the idea here is that there's already going to be a second lane for them or an express lane for them. You have public services, ladies and gentlemen, because that already exists in status quo. Alright, James.
At considering the current system of the state as of the moment, even if you improve, for example, the overall impeachment process, knowing that the people are already apathetic as it is, and these kinds of politicians are powerful enough to actually silence them, how is the possibility of success even going to exist in your paradigm?
It's not apathy that's wrong, James. It's that people don't know the access or how to access, to prosecute these individuals to begin with, right? People will care about their systems. People will always care when the things around them are shit, right? So you have to understand that making a spectacle of Panelo is not going to solve the long-standing traffic as a problem, right? People will always feel as though they have to speak up, and people will always speak up. The problem is that there is no sustainable and proper way for them to prosecute these individuals. So we think that this policy is trash. Let's go on to my second argument, right? Let's go on to how best we practice democracy and status quo. Democracy is best practice and status quo, ladies and gentlemen, when the people in itself and the government have actively both accountabilities to begin with. Accountability from the government to provide services for people, ladies and gentlemen, also includes people paying taxes. But aside from that, ladies and gentlemen, the people in itself also have to hold the government accountable when the system, ladies and gentlemen, are both at equal level playing fields, right? The system shouldn't work against the people at the end of the day. So we think that the best form of change, ladies and gentlemen, is how we best build an avenue for individuals to hold politicians more accountable. It's a the day, right? Government or politicians, ladies and gentlemen, should be an equal playing field with the people of the everyday working man. But in this instance, the equal playing field, ladies and gentlemen, will only exist if the people have easier access of accountability and to prosecute these individuals when corruption comes at the end of the day. We understand, right, that in order for you to have a healthy democracy, ladies and gentlemen, there's supposed to be somebody who will lead us and somebody who will provide us basic services and make decisions for us. But in this instance, these individuals have made decisions that's completely against.
What are the responsibilities that politicians have to adhere to, especially in the context of the Philippines today? Number one, we think that they should give importance to the quality of platforms and services that they provide to their people, meaning that these individuals' main priority is to be able to give their constituents the best kind of healthcare system, educational system, transport system, for example, that's free and of quality, which is clearly non-existent because of the fact that there is a corruption that is burning that inside the Malacanang. But secondly, you have to be able to fully understand how or what perpetuates these kinds of problems and constructs in the first place. But what are the questions that we're going to answer in this debate? Number one, of how it's intrinsically morally the responsibilities of these politicians to choose and use the public service system. And secondly, how this goal obviously results to requiring these people to do so. But thirdly, of how requiring them will ultimately be the only way to improve the said system. But before that, let's engage with the opening opposition. They told you that number one, hey, you know what? These people are still people, so they have the right to choose the private system. But number two, even if they did choose the public one, they still wouldn't understand the struggle because apparently they have power premium placed upon them and would most likely corrupt the system. We think that we have to be able to call out the opening opposition for not being able to fully explain to us the extent of how corruption, which intrinsically worsens these kinds of systems, will take place even after knowing that these politicians will be required to subscribe to them at the end of the day. But secondly, for not understanding the psyche of the state and how it's clearly justifiable for the Filipino people, for example, to require their leaders to get admitted to a public hospital with bad healthcare system at the end of the day. And thirdly, for not understanding the current political climate and relationship between the state, the people, and how the impeachment process improvement will never be working at the end of the day. Because their overall counterfactual is that number one, what we should be doing is that we should have a sustainable development goal that is currently going to be like calling out these kinds of politicians and impeach them at the end of the day. We think, ladies and gentlemen, with the current culture of apathy of the people, for example, these kinds of individuals will never be able to file cases, for example, against these kinds of powerful politicians, because we think that even if people are suffering at the end of the day, they still wouldn't care because of the fact that there's too much bureaucracy to take in the first place. Meaning that people who are already powerful will most likely just scrap out these individuals because we invite the narrative coming from the opening opposition. If we already have a concession that these politicians are intrinsically powerful, tendency is fighting at their very best, even if they did or even if there was someone who will file a case against them, most likely these kinds of impeachment cases would be scrapped out of the system because of the fact that these politicians are powerful enough. So with that kind of system, for example, even if you improve so much to such extent that there will be people who are actually like knowledgeable enough, we think that those kinds of impeachment cases wouldn't have the kind of judicial processes that will take place in the first place because of the fact that those kinds of instances would most likely happen because of the fact that these politicians are already powerful as it is. But on a later discussion, they told you that hey, people are not apathetic, that people just don't know anything about these kinds of processes. So what we should be doing is that we should make them educated enough. We think, ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of mechanisms for people to know about these kinds of things. Talk about the gazette, for example, of the government or the official site that the people could always have access to. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that the current manifestation of why people or how people are pathetic in the first place is already obvious enough to such extent that we have to be able to find other means at the end of the day to make these kinds of politicians actually see and feel the current system or the current public service system that's currently being felt and where people who are clearly on the ground benefit from. But before that, yes, Aaron.
You can't fault them for being apathetic. Of course they feel all the corruption that they have inside. They're everyday working people. What do you need to solve under your paradigm if it's so easy for you as a government to require them to use public services? Why is it not easy for you to have, sustainable process without having to go all through this?
Ladies and gentlemen, that's where we identify the importance of requiring them, for example. What does it mean when you require these kinds of people, and why is that the best way, for example, for us to be able to solve the problem that the opening opposition has? This is where we discuss, because the opening government never had any discussion of what it means to require these kinds of politicians, for example, and how that's going to solve the problem at the end of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that if it's so hard for you to be able to require these politicians, for example, to follow bureaucracy or to follow rules and not corrupt the system at the end of the day, we think that these are the kinds of mechanisms where you get to have a hold on them the best. Meaning that when you require them, for example, you intrinsically apply the same kind of rules that applies to the common people, for example, when it comes to acquiring these kinds of public services. So with the comfort that the opening opposition was talking about of how these politicians would most likely just get their advantages because they're politicians and they already have premium place about them, will intrinsically be obliterated because of the fact that the rules applying to the common people will intrinsically apply to them. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that with that kind of requirement, for example, these kinds of politicians will intrinsically see that, hey, this kind of system is clearly not something that people will benefit from at the end of the day, and there needs to be a change. But on a further discussion of how these individuals will most likely change the overall system, for example, and not corrupt the system, we think, ladies and gentlemen, that these kinds of individuals will most likely change the system, because unlike Panelo, for example, or the number one example coming from the opposition side, these politicians would have to experience these kinds of bad services for the rest of their administration. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that with that kind of extent and actual longevity of their kind of power and the suffering that they have to experience when they do subscribe to these kinds of systems, they have to be able to endure the everyday pain of having to commute in jeepneys, for example, or MRT, or talk about how bad the healthcare system is at the end of the day, and how it's intrinsically going to affect them, or even their children, ladies and gentlemen, when they do have vaccines of dengue or dengue, for example. We think that those are the kinds of accountability measures that intrinsically will be perpetuated because of the fact that you intrinsically make these kinds of politicians feel what it means to be like the common people, feel how it's going to be or what it is to be able to commute or to be able to have to access or subscribe to healthcare system, to a public one that clearly doesn't even give you the medicine that you deserve or the medicine that is needed for you to get well, for example. We think that with that kind of the paradigm, ladies and gentlemen, is that the best case coming from the closing government is that you get politicians who are clearly honest or who are clearly going to be changing the overall system and wouldn't corrupt. But the worst case coming from our side is that yes, politicians would still be corrupt for example, at the end of the day, and then politicians, amidst these kinds of requirements, will actually be having their way. But this is where you make the people much more intrinsically activists in being able to call them out. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that if ever there are actually manifestation of these kinds of politicians getting their way just because they're powerful, for example, that's how you make people want to actually call them out. So the apathy problem is then solved because at the end of the day, you make people want to engage with the political climate. What have we told in the discussion? Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to have a better society, side with the closing government. They're very proud to propose.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 26 seconds. We call on member of opposition.
Here, here.
Mr. Chair, we don't think that in order for a politician to actually understand or feel what it actually is like to be in poverty, we have to subject that certain politician to live in a squatter area, right? We don't think that that's wrong. Because first of all, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, we think that either way, politicians are already aware of this situation, right? So what we have to ask, Mr. Chair, is that where are we able to make sure that these politicians can efficiently do their jobs, right? Where we don't waste anybody's time. Because government's whole battle cry here, right, is that, hey, you know what? If we let a politician ride a jeep ride, it's going to make this person
person more sympathetic towards the traffic problem at the end of the day. What we tell you, Mr. Chair, what's going to happen is that these politicians are probably just going to be escorted by police escorts at the end of the day, right? That even if they are riding jeepneys, right, preferential treatment isn't going to be removed at the end of the day, right? And that's something that we have to take into consideration, because the greatest battle cry that we've got right even from open government is that, hey, you know what? We need to humble down these politicians. But we already told you continuously, right? How these politicians are already alienated in society, sit down, and that even if they do ride a certain bus to going to their work, we tell you that isn't going to solve the whole traffic problem, right? Because how are we going to elevate this debate, right? Well, our opposition already told you about how it's a waste of other people's time, right? And we have to ask ourselves, Madam Chair, right, that how this is we should not require this certain policy for politicians, right? Because we have to ask ourselves, right, that we have to tell ourselves that it's going to affect not only this certain policy, but how policy making is affected as a whole, right? Because as a whole, we tell you, Mr. Chair, that we do not want to added hindrances or burdens both for the mass and these politicians from forwarding other policies at the end of the day, right? Because we do not think that we should require these politicians to actually follow through this policy, right? Because coming from closing opposition, we tell you that we do not want to treat these certain politicians as prince or princesses, right? But what we want, Mr. Chair, is to make sure that these politicians get to their certain work without having to be continuously added by hidden burdens. That we tell you does not have any logical link into making sure that these politicians actually get their work done at the end of the day, right? This is where we're very important in this debate, because we're going to tell you about how it's important that we also talk about the certain politicians' necessity, right? And how if you add so much burden and add so much attention into making sure that these politicians are actually taking the jeep going to their work, it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder, right? That what if a certain politician has, for example, an emergency that requires his or her to actually take a private transportation, right? It's going to create too much backlash at the end of the day. For these politicians, Mr. Chair, right? That what happens is that you discredit this politician as a whole, right? Let's take, for example, Alexandra Cortez, right? And her whole advocacy about reducing carbon footprint, right? And the fact that there was one time that she went to a party in a private car, right? What happened is that she became labeled by society as an eco-hypocrite, right? What happened next is that it became harder for her to actually forward policies that actually help climate change, right? Because what happened is that the backlash that she got from the people, right? Just because, hey, you know what, because of the one time that she took a private transport, right? It became harder for her to actually do her job, because the people then lost their trust on her.
Here.
For that one certain thing that she did, right? Sit down, both of you. But we're going to tell you, right, that how this is inherently wrong. Because what it does, that if you actually allow these hindrances to continue to happen, right, is that it's going to affect not only policies about traffic to be passed, right, but it's also going to affect other policies from being passed at the end of the day to actually help, right? Sit down, not yet. So what happens is that we have to understand that this responsibility of politicians at the end of the day does not only extend to the problems of traffic, right? We have to understand that these politicians are probably still have sessions to do, right, to actually forward policies about healthcare services, right? But what happens if you add a certain burden to these politicians to go to these sessions at a later time, right? It's going to be harder to actually let these politicians focus on actually finding solutions to implement these certain policies. James.
We already told you, Camille, that the premium placed on these kinds of people will be obliterated because of the fact that they're required to take the meaning that the rules will apply to them. But secondly, if your problem is that these politicians will be hindered, isn't that the psyche of why they would improve it in the first place?
No, we don't think, right, that this is exactly where they're wrong. We already told you about how preferential treatment for these politicians, even if you place them in public transportation, won't change the fact that they're going to try
try harder to actually pass policies, right? We told you, right, that the only goal, or that what we should focus on coming from closing opposition is to strengthen representation in the grassroots, right? And we don't think that the solution is to make sure that the politicians experience every problem that citizens are facing, right? But we say that politicians and citizens have to meet halfway, right? Meaning that if we actually strengthen policies to make sure that there's more delegation for these citizens to actually approach these politicians in formal settings, right? Not just like in a certain bus ride. We tell you that it's more effective for these policies and actually concerns to be lobbied at the end of the day. That's something that we want. Because coming from closing opposition, we tell you that we have to also value the efficiency and time that these politicians need to have in order to actually forward these roles, right? And we do not want to continue these politicians from being added burdens, right? And that will actually hinder them from actually helping these people at the end of the day. So coming from closing opposition, we tell you that if you want to live in a world where everybody efficiently works, right, and we're actually focusing on the right problems at the end of the day, we tell you that you have to side with you.
Speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 5 seconds. To crystallize the case of closing government whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you really going to rally with the entire opposition's case, which is basically tautological to you by proving to you that status quo today is already shit and how much more our policy is never going to work once we ignore that? Ladies and gentlemen, what we got from the opening opposition side, right, is that how there is the premium that will always continually exist, right, and that will never cease to stop, right, and then that they've added more to the idea of how accountability on our side is going to be a detriment of that to us, right? I'll be presenting one issue to you today in this debate. The issue being, in which paradigm do politicians mobilize their efforts for change? But before that, a few layers of rebuttal to the entire opposition bench, right? On their idea of how premium will always exist, right? Here's how premium will cease to continually exist and how that will be alleviated at the very least once we enforce this policy, because their entire analysis on that has been very faulty, right? Once we see a normalization and a change of this employed on the ground level of society, we are going to see that premium continually desist once we see these politicians actually want to change for the things that is very important to cater to, that is very important to address in the society, such as public services. Let's contextualize this on a first world country. Rich people, politicians take public transportation because they've improved on that. What happens if we're going to be completely apathetic about this on countries like the Philippines and all the other third world countries? Nothing is going to happen because we're just letting these politicians continually be apathetic, right? Unlike these first world countries where they've employed necessary means of having to establish better policies and better change, we don't think the premium will continually exist, right, if we're going to employ this policy at the very least, right? Moreover, on their side of accountability, how this is going to be very faulty, right? It seems to be more prone to hindrances in the forms of development when it comes to their side, right? Because look at the politicians and how they're dealing with public services, especially in the context of the Philippines today. They're just saying that, oh, it's okay, and they've like given it one try to say that. Are we really going to rally on Iranian's idea of how we're going to change and entirely revamp the system by looking for other methods to show complaints? Public hearings, conferences are just going to be a means of telling to the people that something is going to happen, right? We think those are false promises that is never going to prove for a better change and benefit under a change of system that they want at the very end of the day, right? But before that, yes.
You have politicians rallying and making a fool of themselves, turning this into propaganda
these politicians at the ground level, even if they are going to be assholes that are going to be corrupt at the end of the day, let's assume the worst case of what's going to happen at closing government, right? If corruption is amassed through still tokenistic means, wherein the people are still favoring these politicians and that's going to happen, right? We think that even if that happens, when they want to improve in only a specific region full of, like, I don't know, place with hospitals and whatnot, we think that there is still a large benefit for change there, because at least they are trying to provide for, they are providing for something not only inclusive of them, but to a society, right? And we think that defeats your idea of how this is just going to be like a means of propaganda, right? And another layer of analysis on us, on our worst case, on even if that is going to happen, right? How corruption is going to be alleviated is that still relating that means that these politicians will not continually push for. Well, even if they did push for corruption, at least they're still catering to the needs of society as well. So going on to my first issue, in which paradigm do politicians mobilize their efforts for change, right? So for the entire opposition side, right, basically they're telling us that status quo is doing terrible and providing us with such speculative accusations of how the plausibility of transparency, corruption mitigation on our side is very faulty, right? We think that is very frivolous to point out, right? Because James has already been adamant with the idea by telling to you that once we put these politicians at the ground level, at least they are going to employ the necessary means, things that they would want to avoid themselves, and mechanize this on different parts of society, right? And we think that is very pivotal in this debate, wherein we see these actors, these politicians actually want to see a change for something. Apart from their side, wherein we've seen nothing substantial on as to how these politicians can actually mechanize on wanting to change society, right? Because they're just telling us that they're shit already. Moreover, rebutting on the idea of what the closing opposition side has presented with us, right? The inherent harm of damaging the choice of using, I don't know, privatized services, as used by your example earlier, isn't it the reason that we improve? Isn't this the point of James earlier? That isn't this a reason why we would want to improve these services at the very end of the day, right? If your focus is of representation, don't you think that there is bigger fish to fry? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to bite the bullet and argue that there are bigger issues to be solved rather than just representation of wanting to prove for climate change. In the context of the Philippines, why is this going to present a better trade-off, right? We're going to bite the bullet and tell you that there are bigger issues such as corruption, and that is only going to be addressed and catered to once we employ our policy of wanting to change something. Once we put these politicians at the ground level of having relatability. So what I told you in my speech, I have told you under the two paradigms, we only see these politicians mobilize their efforts for change once they are put on the ground level, once they are able to empathize with the people of the society, where the people, the transparency of their corrupt actions can be seen more clearly, right? And we think that the premise of what the entire opposition side has presented is very faulty at the very end of the day, right? And that is why we are going to take this debate. Having that said, we are very proud to
Speakers spoke for 6 minutes and 55 seconds to crystallize the case of closing opposition with.
We appreciate that the government side wants to fix everything that's problematic within public services, right? However, we felt as if they took an approach that was slightly tokenistic. What do we mean? They failed to give us a tangible mechanism as to how they're actually going to fix these public services, right? They told us that they're going to treat this as a minor offense coming from open government. How do you know if these politicians don't take public transport or don't invest in public healthcare, we're going to fine them, for example, or give them a minor offense, etc., etc. Coming from closing government, they focus primarily on the tokenistic value of why these politicians need to take public transportation or need to invest in public healthcare. But neither one of them discussed why it's incredibly important for them to do this in order to change the system as a whole. This is incredibly problematic, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Politicians have traffic and public healthcare on their minds, ladies and gentlemen. Camille made it really clear in her speech. In fact, politicians are the ones who decide the outcome of every single aspect of society. How the drug war is going, for example. How our relationship with China and other countries is going and is doing at the end of the day. And if you add another burden towards these politicians, for example, who are actually capable of making a change towards these public services that are incredibly faulty, not only do you hinder their capability to solve the problem, but you also hinder their capability to actually cater towards those problems and actually listen to the people on the grassroots level, right? I have two issues on today's debate. Number one, how do we best bring to the attention of these politicians the issues in status quo? But number two, I'm going to discuss to you where do we best solve the problems in public services, right? But before that, let me tackle the paradigm of the entire government side. Because of the tokenistic approach they took towards viewing the debate, not only did they devalue the issue within public services in and of itself, they even managed to change the way society looks at public services, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, there's a clamor from people to change the way public services is being handled. A better MRT system, for example, a more affordable and effective healthcare system, etc., etc. But if you follow the case coming from opening government, where they treat it as a minor offense, or the tokenistic case of closing government, where they look at the value of everything, ladies and gentlemen, instead of making it a clamor for being better, you only change the perception of people towards these issues. What does this mean? The focus of the people now becomes whether or not this certain politician took the bus to work today, ladies and gentlemen, or whether or not this certain politician actually invested in public health care for their children, ladies and gentlemen. Not only does this shift the clamor of the people towards whether or not Duterte rode the GP towards Malacanang, but it also removes the capability of these politicians to actually see the value of other aspects within society, and that's something that's regrettable and something that wasn't discussed on government side. First issue, how do we best bring to the attention of these politicians the issues that we're facing in status quo, ladies and gentlemen? Camille was very clear in her speech, right? Not only did she say that preferential treatment will never be removed in society, she also told us that it's going to affect policy making as a whole. What does this mean? People, for example, who are focusing on problems with the environment, people who are focusing problems on education or agriculture will also now be plagued with the issue of whether or not they should take the bus today, because if they do, they're going to be late to the cabinet meeting and actually discuss social issues that are important to their office, right? What does this mean towards these politicians, and what does it mean to policy making as a whole? It was clear coming from Camille that this added hindrance will not only affect the capability of these politicians to create tangible solutions towards problems within their own field. It will also remove the capability of people to clamor for change within public services, ladies and gentlemen. It means that people treat public transportation of these politicians differently, right? It's a question of whether or not Salvador Manelo took an angkas towards Malacanang, or if he preferred to ride his own car, right? It turns issues like this, sit down, and social problems like this into some sort of a social media meme that people just look at, for example, and say, oh, Manelo rode angkas today, it's fine, he's fine, guys. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, when we really want to value these social issues, you need to go to the grassroots level, and that's exactly what Camille told you in her speech when she told you that these politicians already know that these issues are happening, and they're doing everything they can to change. Current status quo. Sure,
The only reason why it's tokenistic, which is your whole case, is because of the fact that it's not required. If you read the motion, it assumes that they will have to experience it for the whole of their lives. Meaning that the only way for you to have your best case, for example, is if you were to have that kind of paradigm where
Do you really think that Duterte or Panelo or every other politician is not capable of having a police escort towards Malacanang every single day if that meant that it eased life a little bit for them? Sure, these politicians can take the Jeep, but these politicians will take an empty Jeep with no one else in there straight to Malacanang if it allows them to get to their jobs earlier. This is something that wasn't even preempted in their case, ladies and gentlemen. So we best bring to the attention of these politicians social issues that are the problems within public services when we allow these politicians to do their jobs instead of creating hindrances and problems that will only inhibit their capability to actually create solutions. But lastly, where do we best solve the problem with public services, ladies and gentlemen? Something entirely untouched coming from government side, right? Because they failed to consider that these politicians are creating not only policies for public services, but for the rest of the country's problems as well. We best cater to these, we best create solutions, and we best cater towards these problems, ladies and gentlemen. If these politicians rather are able to gain access to information or are able to actually understand the problem coming from the grassroots level. But if we add hindrances towards policy making, if we actually force them to ride the jeepney every other day, if we make a spectacle out of whether or not this politician rode the bus today or not, they're never going to see the value, or they're never going to be able to create solutions towards these real problems that are affecting the rest of society.
Speakers spoke for 7 minutes.